Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on Healing and Made Free with Janet Bluntons. I have a special person on with me. All my guests are special, but Angie, welcome to my podcast.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Angie, I am going to dive right into this because I think what we're dealing with today, suicide and our children overdosing, it's prevalent.
Mhm.
And it's sad because we're losing so many millennials and Gen Zs. A friend of mine sent me your story and I thought I have to have you on my show. Angie, can you share with my audience, just a little bit about you and your family, and then we'll talk about your son.
Okay. Well, we're just a typical suburban Dallas family. We live in Richardson. I am a retired veterinarian. I had to retire sooner than I wanted to because I have severe osteoarthritis in these hands. So I have like 80-something-year-old hands, so I couldn't do it anymore. But I had a litter. I had twins, a boy and a girl, Blair and Brandon, and they were just the joy of our lives. Blair is a veterinarian in Cypress, actually Waller. She lives in Cypress, Texas. She followed in my footsteps. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And my son, he went to college, but unfortunately, he, in high school, started doing what a lot of young men do. It started with alcohol, but his progression of usage began with a girl who was going to go to homecoming with him his junior year, and she found out he didn't party. And so his friend, being a 16-year-old male, in his mind, he thought it was a good idea to pour my son vodka shots, got him drunk, and videotaped it and sent it to the girl and said, "See, Brandon parties." And I used that sort of as the beginning, so to speak, because as a mom, I just, tried to encourage him that, there are other fish in the sea. And we didn't know this happened. We didn't know that this little incident had happened until a few years later when we were in family rehab with my son, and that story came out. And then
how old was Brandon at that time, Angie?
At that time, he was 16.
Okay.
And he was, we were a church going family. Both of my kids grew up in the church. They went on youth mission trips. They were in Awana. They were little sparks for Jesus. If you're familiar with the Awana program, they memorized Bible verses. Our church was a big part of our family. And that verse in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That was, I thought I was protected because I did that, but that's not a promise. It's generally true, but it's not a promise. And we certainly found that out. But that particular day, I remember that day. I just didn't know what was going on because that young man said, "Oh, Brent, my son was a golfer. He was a pretty good little athlete, and he was really good at golf." And that young man had told me that, "Oh, we were at the golf course and Brandon had heat stroke that day." And I'm like, "Well, that's weird. It's October, but yeah, it makes sense." And he was vomiting. And so all of the signs of drunkenness in our child were there. And I, as a veterinarian, and my husband, who's a pharmacist, we certainly should have recognized the signs of substance use in our child, and we missed it. And later, as we got into rehab with our son, we were sort of the poster children, so to speak, of denial. Like if those two can miss it, anybody can. And so that was kind of a little wake up call to us. And what I tell other parents, we trusted our kids probably too much.
So I'm glad that you said that, because all of our children want their parents to trust them, but then they start having secrets. And I tell parents that I don't care, you know, how old your child is, or they want you to trust them. As long as they're in your house, I think they should still be looking under their mattress, looking in their drawers and looking at their phones. And it's not that you don't trust them. It's just that it's still part of a parent's responsibility. But, you know, a lot of parents don't see that way because their kids are so good at manipulation. I'm not saying Brandon was, but they're like, okay,
Oh,
you
he
don't
was.
trust me. And then a parent feel guilty. And then things like this happen. How did you get to the place where you are now, where Brandon wind up losing his life?
Well, it was certainly, you know, a journey. It started when he was 16. And then as things became more clear to us of what was going on with him, we got him into rehab. Then we felt like, okay, this was just youthful indiscretion, and we sent him to college. But I feel like what sealed the deal, so to speak, of his addiction, and I really like to use the term substance use disorder because it's less stigmatizing than addiction. But his substance use disorder, in my mind now, looking back, began when he had his tonsils out. It was after high school, that summer between high school and college, and he was on Vicodin, a lot of Vicodin. I know that a tonsillectomy is very painful, especially in a young person. It really is. And he just laid on the couch all summer long. And I truly believe that was the beginning of him truly having a substance use disorder. Yes, he had these issues in high school where I felt like he was, you know, with his anxiety and that sort of thing that started with that incident with that girl dumping him because he didn't party, so to speak. But there were other things too. Like I said, he was a very good golfer. I mean, my son, I just would like to talk about him just a little bit because I don't want to
go ahead and brag on the boy. I love it.
I mean, he had a smile that could light up a room. He was a handsome guy. He was athletic. He loved the Lord. He was involved in youth mission trips, and he went to youth group. He was just he was funny. He loved his family. He always made us laugh, and his laugh was it was a unique laugh, and you couldn't help but be happy when you were around him when he was not using substances.
Let me jump in here a minute. How do you think how did he get caught on substance abuse?
Well,
did he have an injury or?
No, it started what we call a progression of usage started at 16 with alcohol, but alcohol was never his drug of choice. That became opiates, and that started with opiates. It probably started before. I just didn't know all of the stories, right? But I can really key in when he had his tonsils out and he got on Vicodin, and then that progressed as things went on. Now, you can throw in weed, and I have a whole lot to say about weed as well, because it's not the same as when we were young. I'm not saying I never did do weed, but I'm just using that as an example that the concentration is so much more now that even in rehab, we had young people in rehab that were addicted to marijuana, and marijuana now is even causing mental illness in our young people, like schizophrenia. So I don't want to discount that. And my son did do weed, but it and that's typically with young people, it'll start with alcohol, but then go into marijuana, and then it can go into the harder substances.
You know, and I know that because, you know, I remember when I wasn't doing cocaine, you know, back in my early years. I'm 63 right now, but I wind
Oh
up
my
not
goodness, you
doing
do
it. And
not look it at all.
you're so sweet. And I wind up spending time with people that were doing drugs, and they're like, come on, Janet, just try it. Just try it. And I was like, nah, weed is good enough for me. Sorry about that. These are
That's okay.
weed is good enough for me. But what happened was I wind up saying, okay, I'll try it. And here I'm addicted to cocaine. I tell people, regardless if you think it's sin or not, but sin will take you further than you want to go and keep you longer than you want to stay. I never anticipated on getting addicted, to drugs or even going into the life of homosexuality. But your son was addicted. Was he able to, did he go into treatment or?
He did. And and you bring up a good point. I mean, no one wakes up and says, okay, I think I'm going to be a drug addict. I'm going to be, a substance use abuser. But it starts benignly with young people. And, 90% begin between the ages of 12 and 20. And then it just progresses from there. So yes,
Right.
we got him into several of the country club rehabs that I like to say, rehab after rehab. And I remember being on the phone with an MD who works for our insurance company and just screaming at her saying, you would rather my son die than him get the help that he needs because it would save you money.
You're
And
right.
I think things have changed, hopefully now, with parity and that sort of thing with our insurance companies. But I felt like his stay in rehab was not enough. It wasn't long enough. 30 days, and that
Yeah.
is not enough. And so then he would, have a recurrence of use, and it would just spiral down that
Did he
way.
go to aftercare?
He would go into sober living, but that was probably the biggest disconnect was the aftercare, which is so important. And that's why one thing, the first thing I did is we started the Brandon Rogers Memorial Endowed Scholarship Fund at Texas A&M. My son was in College Station, and I felt like that was what was missing in his aftercare. Was he did AA and he did NA, but he never had a connection with his peers that were, his own age. The hardest place to stay sober is a college campus.
It is.
It's rampant. And so collegiate recovery communities and programs they're growing and growing and growing. And I felt like that could have changed the trajectory of his life had that been in place in College Station. And so I'm happy to say that after my son's scholarship became endowed, the Aggie recovery community became a reality just 6 months later. For fall of 2016, but unfortunately, it's not there anymore. A&M, the administration that's there now doesn't feel like there's a need. So I'm still fighting to get that back, because the students that were involved in the Aggie recovery community, they were chemical engineers, they were pre-med, because one kid, he was in there because his brother had died. And so he's in medical school now. And so we had so many smart students. And one kid said the Aggie recovery community saved my life. And I feel like that connection, that's the biggest part of recovery, is community.
And I believe that. And because I tell people, my field is homosexuality, but I was just listening to a video this morning of 3 young girls that committed suicide because of the schools want to propel them into that life, not get the parents involved, take God out of schools, take prayer out of schools, and they're losing everything that I believe God wants for our children. And the schools do not want to work with us. If you're a child that reads your Bible, then you're made fun at. Or you can't read your Bible, you need to go get a different book in the media center, in the bookstore. But when I read about this young girl who the school was helping to even transition, she literally went to the train track and stood right in front of the train
Mhm.
and let the train run. This just happened like 2 years ago. And so we are losing our kids not only to suicide, but to overdose. What can we do as parents that you've learned more to help our children?
Well, one thing for me is, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I think I tried to micromanage his recovery, which was not helpful. I went to a ministry here in Dallas called The Prodigal, and I went to Families Anonymous, and I went to Al-Anon. I did all of the things, and I have some regrets. We did some things right, we did some things wrong, but we did the best we could with the information that we had at the time. One of my biggest regrets was that we didn't use medical assisted therapy, which is now proven that it helps, especially with opiates. The hardest drugs to get off of are
Mm-hmm.
alcohol and
Mm-hmm.
opiates. For so long with my son, I wore a necklace, and it was a cross. I wish I could find it. I'm redoing my closet, and I've misplaced it, but because I wear
Mm-hmm.
now his fingerprint around my every day. I wear this, but I wore a necklace, and it was a cross, and inside the cross was a heart, and inside the heart was a hand, and
Mm-hmm.
it my verse for my son, or for me, my prodigal verse, and I'll just share that with you, was Psalm
Please.
27:13. I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. And I was waiting for that day that my prodigal would return. And I wore this cross as a reminder, not that I really needed a reminder to pray for my son every day, but it was just something tangible that I could hold on to. And the cross is the beginning of change and forgiveness. And the heart showed my love for my son as well as God's love for him. And the little hand showed that my son could not go further than God's love could reach. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was my prayer, is that one day my prodigal son would return, and I would kill the fatted calf. And I just didn't know which home he was going to return to.
Yeah.
And so my son had been at the Salvation Army. It's funny that the two best rehabs that my son went to were and this is him saying this to us, was the Salvation Army and the Dallas 24-hour club, both free, after spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars trying to get him help. And we sent him to some supposedly really good places. He found the most help there. But what
Angie,
happened?
Angie, when you're mentioning about Brandon, you know, I'm not sure it's something I want to know personally, but did you find Brandon, or did
No,
somebody else, or can you
yeah,
share with us a little bit?
I did find my son in a hotel room in Allen. After doing some detective work, I found him there. This was a couple of years before he died. And what gave me hope, and what I didn't think he would ever die, because when I found him in that hotel room, it was me and an Allen police officer. And the police officer asked me, "Is that his normal color?" And I said, "No, no, we've got to open his airway." And I tried to pull him down to open up that airway, but I wasn't strong enough. And I said, "Get the paramedics in here." And they worked on him for a good 20 minutes in that hotel room. And then they had to take him to the nearest hospital. I tried to have them take him to the hospital where my husband works, but they're like, "No, he's too critical." And later on that day, after he started coming around, one of the paramedics asked me, "How's your son doing?" And I said, "I think he's going to be okay. We're getting him transferred to a neuro ICU because that wasn't available at this hospital. So we were getting him transferred to the hospital I originally wanted him at. And the paramedic said, "I'm so sorry, we couldn't take him there." But he said, "I want you to know that your mom detective skills saved that young man's life. We were 1 or 2 minutes from losing him." And I'm like, that was all God. And I kept telling my son, God saved you that day. And I remember when we first got there, they put me in a room by myself because, the room where they give you bad news. And I remember praying the guttural prayers of a mom, "Please, Lord, give him another chance, give him another chance." And God did. And I felt like he wasn't going to die.
When
But
did he
what
pass
happened-
away then?
So he died. He had been at the Dallas 24-hour club. He'd had 4 months of sobriety. He was doing well, but someone had died. Someone had overdosed, a friend that was at the Dallas 24-hour club. And my son had left the Dallas 24-hour club a few days prior to her passing. And so, see, he left his community. And when your sobriety is fragile and you have a major life event like losing a friend, and you can't just go through that in community, he did what he knew would take away his pain. He used. And you can't use the same amount of heroin that you used 5 months prior, or it'll kill you. And that's what did it. It was on a Tuesday. It's funny because I'll never forget. And so Tuesdays are like not my favorite day of the week, right? Mm-hmm. But it was on a Tuesday and I was at work, and I get the call that no parent ever wants to get. And my husband called me and I could tell something was wrong. And I said, "Tell me who died." He goes, "Just come home." And I knew it wasn't my dad. And I knew it wasn't our dog, or he would have brought the dog up to me. And so I would just remember praying on the way home, "Lord, please please don't let this." But I knew in my heart. And when I walked in, it's just even hard to talk about it even now.
How old was he?
He was 24 years old, 4 months and 13 days. So he's forever.
How long ago?
He died in November 3rd of 2015.
Wow. Young.
And that year at that time was the most overdose deaths that we had in the United States. So I hate that my son was a statistic, but there were more than 50,000 deaths that year, but it has gone steadily up. And then last year we lost over 100,000 of our Americans to overdose. 100,000.
Overdose? Is that just overdose, or is it overdose and suicide, or just overdose in general?
That's overdose in general. But if you want to throw suicide in there, and that can bring us back to, so many different mental health disorders that our young people are dealing with right now.
Why do you think we're not dealing with this issue in the United States? We are hearing about it. I mean, I support, the United States sending money to other countries that don't have money, but I feel as though we're here in the United States. Why aren't we taking some of those millions and billions of dollars that we're sending out of the country to other countries? And I'm not trying to be mean, those that are listening in any way, but right here in the United States, we need help. We need to help our millennials, our Gen Zs, our marriages, but we just don't support those that are right here in our own states. Can you wrap your brain around that?
I can't.
What is going on?
Well, part of the problem is that, and this could lead us down a whole nother rabbit trail. But, the opioid crisis was created by a pharmaceutical company, so a greedy family called the Sacklers. And that just got wrapped up, the settlement from that class action lawsuit against Purdue Pharma. You can get a lot more information on that by reading, there's so many articles. 60 Minutes did a thing on it. Dope Sick is a Hulu production that talks about it. There's a Netflix documentary called The Pharmacist, and he helped bring to light a lot of the opioid crisis that was going on in Louisiana. So there's a whole lot of reason. And that's the problem is that we had all of these Americans that were becoming addicted to opiates based on Vicodin and OxyContin. And yet it was so hard to get treatment. It was so hard to get treatment. And we're middle-class white America. So you look at the marginalized, they're not getting help, and they're dying.
Yeah.
And so we needed more treatment available, but we finally ran out of money. We couldn't do it. That's how he ended up at the free places. So we need more good evidence-based treatment centers like the Salvation Army, like the Dallas 24-Hour Club, in places like that to help this demographic.
Are you meeting with other parents who have child that have overdosed, or you have a foundation or some type of organization?
I don't. I get calls. I used to get calls every day about people's pets. It seems like now I get calls from parents whose kids are in crises. I met with a mom recently who had lost her son. It was fentanyl laced, a fentanyl laced pill. So fentanyl is still out there, and we need to. I carry Narcan. If someone who had been with my son had Narcan, would have saved his life. The person, I don't even know who he was with, but they thought he was just snoring, but he was dying, and just left him there.
Do you think our children, and I'm not necessarily saying Brandon, but children in general, they're all using drugs. Do you think they're medicating their pain or something traumatic that they've been through?
Well, I know.
I'm sure there's some that, get hooked because they decide to follow the crowd. But do you think others that are dealing with this is dealing with it, hoping that these drugs will medicate their pain?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of college students, and I mentor students at a public recovery high school in McKinney called Serenity High. It's part of McKinney ISD. And yes, I mean, our students struggle. This generation struggles like no other. I have so many friends, and I know so many young people who struggle with anxiety and depression. And I don't know if it's related to social media or unrealistic expectations. But yes, I think it's a huge problem right now. And I think too, it's, with some people, they may start using weed for anxiety, but weed causes depression. It can cause schizophrenia. So we're in a mental health crisis in this nation. At A&M, for example, they have doubled their mental health budget for students at Texas A&M. And I think all colleges need to do that. The counseling center is overwhelmed with students. So yes, I think for some reason, this generation is really, really struggling.
I think it's a cry for help. I really do, Angie. I think our kids are crying for help. And I think it's important that our families and our parents recognize and be so in tune with what's going on with their children, especially in this day and age, knowing that we have an adversary who had no greater joy than to kill our kids. A lot of people think, they're associating with people that really love them and care about them because they're hanging out together, they're having fun at night. They see people posting pictures on their social media. Oh, they have a great life. They have this. They're miserable. Yeah. They're portraying one thing, but in their heart is something totally different. So I don't want our youth to be mesmerized that somebody's life is better than theirs, because it's a lie. It's almost like me taking 100 pictures before I post that one picture to show everybody, see how good I look. But if we post that first one, we would all see something different. What would you say if you would, we're coming to an end, to parents out there who have already went through what you have went through, losing a child to suicide, I'm sorry, to overdose, and to parents that,
Mhm.
dealt with suicide, how would you minister to them? Will you take a moment and do that for me?
Yeah, I help lead a grief ministry at our church that came about because there wasn't any place. I went to one grief group and it just didn't fit my needs of what I needed. So I started a grief group, and it was led by someone further down the line than I am. Her name is Vanita Briley, but she lost her son to suicide. And she started a foundation called the Grant Halliburton Foundation, which is a great resource, especially here in North Texas, for resources for kids who are struggling with mental illness. So, I'd
Hmm.
like to put a plug in for that. But so we started, my friend Julie also lost her son to suicide, and she found this program called Rebuild. And it is probably the best grief support that I have seen in as I've been dealing with this. But it deals with all kinds of loss, but yet we separate into specific losses, like for me, for into child loss, and it's really good. And one of our sayings is everything is normal in grief, but not everything is helpful. So do helpful things. And so that's what, for me, I didn't want to waste an ounce of this
Hmm.
pain. And I wanted God to make it, to bring purpose in the pain. Not that I had to like it, but it needed to not be wasted. And so that's how come I have been involved with young people in recovery through like the Aggie recovery community, trying to get recovery communities, in at my alma mater. I am on the board of Serenity High in McKinney, which is a sober high school. It is a
Hmm.
recovery high school. It's a it's the longest tenured public recovery high school in the nation. And I didn't know about it. And I'm just 10 miles down the road. If I had known about Serenity when my son was in high school, I would have sent him there, but I didn't know about it. So now I'm
Right.
getting the word out about recovery high schools. And then these graduates from these recovery high schools need to, want to go to college, but they need to go to college where there's a recovery community for them,
Hmm.
or they're not going to be successful.
Hmm.
So that's my passion is,
I think
young
every
people.
school should have some type of recovery program at their school, knowing that college students like to get drunk and do drugs. I did it back in my era. It's even worse today than ever before. And there's a lot of um, uh, things that are happening in our schools that we don't even hear about. There's so many kids that are losing their lives to drugs. We don't hear about half of them because they're afraid to announce it because people might not want to go to school there, or they're going to hear from the parents. But I think parents can have the biggest impact. I think more parents need to get involved in these type of things that you're involved in, even if their child isn't addicted to drugs. You become knowledgeable now, you might be able to save somebody else's life or even your child's life somewhere down the line. And we say that about parents that are dealing with the issue of homosexuality. Okay, so what? You don't have a child that's dealing with homosexuality, but I bet you got a relative out there somewhere. And when you know better, you do better. So we have to do better of becoming a lot more knowledgeable. And the sad thing to say, and I'm going to say it anyway, I think Christians are worse at it. They just don't want to get involved. I mean, it's already that they want everything free. I feel like most of the time you're like, nope, I'm not paying for it, give it to me free. you know but they don't want to get involved either, and they don't want to become knowledgeable. Shame on us, and we're going to have to stand before God someday and answer to God because we didn't get involved.
Well, I think that, yeah, in the Christian sector there can be, a lot of judgment. And I kind of
Yeah.
we lost friends, we did, But I tell you, I am part of a body of believers that rallied around us. There was
That's
no
good.
judgment. I even said at one point that I needed to quit teaching Sunday school, because who wants me to teach their kids when I have a son that's dealing with substance use disorder?
Yeah. And
And
that's a lie.
our children's director said, "You're going to continue to teach," and that was
Good.
just a
Praise
big,
the Lord.
it helped my heart. So I am thankful that I'm part of a body of believers that, I mean, even when my son was in rehab in Houston, one of our pastors drove to Houston from Dallas and drove back to see my son for 45 minutes. And so I'm so thankful for the community that I have here. But yes, I mean, 1 in 3 families is affected by substance use disorder. 1 in 3. And
Wow.
the other 2, they know somebody. So
Right.
yes, everybody needs to get educated. I was naive. I felt
Yeah.
like it wasn't going to happen to me. And
Hmm.
it did. And so that's what I tell people. It can happen to you. So recognize the signs. I missed them, and then know where to get help. And at the
And not be
time,
afraid to be nosy and look in your kids' rooms and on their phones. And, so many, millennials and Gen Zs are threatening their parents, and you have more parents that are afraid of their kids. I know, because I've talked with many of them. We have to become more involved in our children's lives instead of sitting them down and putting them in front of the TV or all these video games. And I know
mhm,
parents right now who children do more video games in these dark rooms instead of telling their kids to get off. Their kids throw a fit, throw their phone, and parents like, fine, go ahead. Instead of saying, as you're going to serve the Lord, you're going to do this, go to your room, I'm taking away. Parents are afraid to do that. Kids are punching holes in the walls and threatening and walking out the door. And if you do anything, your own child will try to throw you in jail. And so I understand, but my mom used to say, I brought you in this world and I'll take you out.
take you out. Yeah.
Bring the
I,
police on, because I'll say it right in front of them. This has been an honor. Is there an email address that you would like to put out there for anybody to reach out to you if they're struggling? If not, it's okay. We'll make sure it's put on the screen as well.
yeah. I mean, it's just, you have my email. That's all I have.
You
Is
want to
that
go ahead
email.
and say it?
Yeah, it's vetrx, vet pharmacist. Get it? Back when the internet was developed, we thought that was a cool email, but it's vetrx at sbcglobal.net. And yes, they can reach out to me. And I know more now than I ever knew then, and I would do some things different. And I would love to help others. But but the big thing for me is that there's hope, and there's hope in recovery. Um, I'd like to just share a verse that for me has just been a big comfort, and it's Isaiah 61:3. And to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And I certainly have experienced beauty instead of ashes, because I think I shared with you early on, that I haven't shared here, that my son had a son, which sometimes with that lifestyle, that happens, right? But neither one of these young people was in a position to raise a child. So the best decision that my son ever made was picking the most amazing family to raise his son and adopt his son. And that amazing family, this was a closed adoption, but something happened at my son's funeral. The dad came to my son's celebration of life, and he went back to his wife and said, we have a piece of their son. We have to have a relationship with them.
I'm
And
so glad.
we didn't ask for that, but we certainly embraced the opportunity.
Well,
And
that is your grandson.
that is, yes. And I have a bonus little granddaughter who is his
Exactly.
big sister. And that's why my son picked them, because his twin was so important, his sibling relationship with his sister, that he wanted his child to have a sibling. And most people who are thrown into the adoption world don't have other children. So this particular family had been turned down 8 times. And so he picked them because of their daughter, and they had a golden retriever, because we're an animal loving family and we love golden retrievers. And so he picked them. And so we're a part of their lives. We're Gigi and Papa D, and my daughter and her husband are Auntie Blair and Uncle Alex. And it is our Beauty from Ashes story. And we're so thankful that we get to be a part of his life. And
well, it sounds like God is using you guys in a mighty way. And you talk about animals. As soon as I move, I am going to get my first mini doodle from somewhere. I want one so bad. They're so adorable, you know, being single, never had kids. And people are like, how are you going to have a dog and you travel a lot? I said, I will figure it out. But Angie, thank you so much for sharing on
thank you.
Healing and Made Free with Janet Poings Ministry. What a powerful story. Those of you that are listening, you know, you just heard Angie's story, and you know what? God is using her in a mighty way. Please feel free to email her. We'll have it on the bottom of the screen. And I thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you. And thank you so much.